the two-day national dialogue concluded yesterday, and some of the key objectives of the upcoming national dialogues are to help foster unity and to eradicate poverty and inequality. But how exactly will the dialogues achieve this? And what about the cost? Development economist and Oxfam South Africa board chair, Phelisa Nkomo, tells us more, and she joins us now. Phelisa, good morning. Welcome to Newzroom Afrika, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, good morning, Ms. Chaba, and good morning to the viewers.
All right. Now, firstly, given your expertise as a development economist and your role at Oxfam, what is your assessment of the National Dialogue Convention's potential, particularly to address South Africa's structural unemployment crisis, which currently stands at 32.9%?
No, I mean, the national conversation is really important. And I think the people who had withdrawn earlier raising the modalities of the national conversation also have a genuine concern. And I don't think we should discount the concerns they've actually brought forward. But the national convention is also taking place at the time where there's actually desperation for something that needs to happen in South Africa. You know, young people would say something must give. So in essence, I think the reason it had to go on is to realize that the broken telephone is actually sitting at different levels. Firstly, it's sitting even amongst the citizens. I mean, Ms. Chaba, please tell me, why would communities unto which its social capital depends on trust, human and social solidarity, today they are extorting each other money and asking for protection fee? That's a broken telephone, but also fundamental. And again, I mean, I might appear as though I'm actually minimizing to communication. It's not. I think the value of human life in South Africa is really deteriorated. But also what's happening is that working class community are actually imploding. We've been saying this, by the way, even pre-COVID. I think post-COVID, the signs were there. We're seeing an implosion. And the implosion initially came through gender-based violence, for instance. That was the mirror unto which we're seeing. The second one was through increased crime, where, in fact, actually communities were really scared that they were tormented by young people who were just taking what they thought belonged to them, or were just taking things that people had worked for. Now, obviously, extortion is it's a structural issue, and it's a structural issue that indicates a number of things. It indicates, firstly, that our constitution, unto which it's meant to really promote human rights, it means that that has not sunk in, and it's not a value that is embedded in communities that are experiencing extortion. Also the second issue, it's the failure of the constitution to meet its obligation of building an equitable society where everyone has access to opportunity. So what happens is that people are turning against each other.
Now, there's public outcry about the cost of this national dialogue exercise. So from an economic development perspective, how do you justify this expenditure, and what measurable returns on investment should South Africans expect?
No, every society has to pay a premium for conversation, by the way, Mna. And I think, again, the concerns about the cost are actually quite important. But also, it also means that we organize conversations in a very traditional way, highly centralized. Because part of this, by the way, South Africans would have participated, many of them, without being at UNESA, right? All you do is that you use a technological platform that allows South Africans to participate for the 2 days, okay? That's one. And I do think that the fact that the political system actually tends to influence how the national convention has been. It must be in one place. We must all of us be in the same space. We must all, be in the same room. But in fact, you could have just decentralized where the president speaks. Anyone else who's located, you organize a platform, and people converge in different small venues. And that could have been coordinated in advance. And you get South Africans to speak. I mean, and I think for me, how the logistics, how the national convention was organized also is a strong indication that I think we just speak this concept of digitization, but we've not really embedded in how we organize ourselves. And I think this public conversation was a case in point. But let me just come into the issue of the cost. I think I'm not discounting the concerns about the cost, but there's premium in every society, particularly when you are confronted with the type of crisis. I mean, South Africa, we're confronted with structural crisis that government is meant to resolve, but also South Africans have to speak to each other. So, for instance, if I stick to the issue specifically on gender-based violence, I mean, when a man decides to kill their wife, that's not a government issue. It's a human rights issue, right?
Yeah.
It means South Africans have to speak to each other. When younger women are walking on the street and they get raped, or a young woman gets raped by a group of people, it's actually part of it. While it's a patriarchal issue, right, which actually has a lot of toxic masculinity, but also it's citizens having to speak to each other. But we've
Phelisa,
actually dragged this conversation for the long time.
Let's expand on that just a little bit. Let's expand on that just a little bit in terms of the desired outcomes from the national dialogue in particular. I mean, you have rightfully mentioned that the value of human life in South Africa has deteriorated. You've also said that we're seeing an implosion of gender-based violence and crime. And now Deputy Minister Sibiya warned that without decisive action, we risk further social instability. How should the dialogue outcomes specifically address the link between unemployment and crime rates in South African communities?
Yeah, no, I mean, crime in South Africa is a socio-economic issue, by the way, because you look at the nature of crimes. I mean, we have petty crimes, of course, we have violent crimes. And because we have structural unemployment and a macroeconomic crisis, we're not able to separate. And in essence, you find both our criminal justice systems actually overloaded with the fact that someone had grabbed a bag, someone had grabbed a cell phone, someone had grabbed a computer, etc., right? Amongst the basic things that needs to be done is to introduce an economic policy that speaks to South African challenges. So you have a group of citizens who are unskilled in South Africa. You have a group of citizens who are semi-skilled in South Africa. We have a group of people who are highly skilled in South Africa. In fact, data shows that almost every category now, it's starting to struggle with employment issues. Now, the biggest one, of course, is unemployment. So amongst the key things that the state needs to do, firstly, turn this country into a construction site and get spending on capital fixed formation in a form of building infrastructure, right? Because then you activate what's called supply side and demand side of the economy. From the back of that, you actually support a private sector to make it sure that it actually spends its funds, its capital on infrastructure investment. The third one, you support both youth and women's economic initiative. The fifth one is that you loosen the criteria as well on public procurement. I mean, our public procurement system, it's very difficult to access opportunities. I mean, Eskom is sitting with billions to spend on procurement. But for a black woman and a young South African to secure a business opportunity at Eskom, at least it takes between 18 to 2 years because of compliance issues.
So Phelisa, let's talk about the dialogue in particular. So how do you foresee these objectives being achieved by the national dialogue?
Well, I mean, there are several things. I think part of the dialogue may not achieve the grand objective, but it's intended to get South Africans talking, which I think for me, when I was referring earlier, that we've heard a broken telephone, but where those who are entrusted with power were doing very minimal. We've actually raised the issue of deteriorated public governance and even local governance. So there needs to be strengthening of local government. And by the way, government has long recognized this, but I do think that politics are at play at local government, and that's why it's very, very difficult. I mean, data shows that most of the councillors who sit within local government don't have post-matric qualification, just above 60%. So you can imagine that to comprehend with local government issues and with limited education, it also means that that's actually going to slow down delivery. So there are actually concomitant issues that we need to resolve as society. Amongst those, we must be very clear that people that we appoint in public office must be people who have technical capacity, at least who have some form of educational background to understand the portfolio, but also encourage political parties, and including those who appoint people in power, that they must appoint people who have technical capacity. I mean, sometimes you actually worry when someone who has a background in nursing gets given a responsibility in the economic cluster, right?
Right.
And you just think that, really, it means that that person is also not going to be, it's being set up as at an individual level. But also at the same time, it means that the social progress that you're going to see out of that is actually going to be very slow, because they have to learn for the longest time.
Right. Now, COSATU supports the dialogue in itself, while promising to push for accountability and transparency from within, as they've said, quote unquote. Now, when we look at labor unions, for instance, sometimes conflicting interests with job creation, protecting existing jobs versus creating new ones, what role should organized labor play in designing public employment programs?
No, in fact, I think it's a combination of what role should organized labor and civil society actually should play. And I think others have taken a political position that they would rather influence inside. So instead of staying away from the National Convention, then you influence the discourse inside. So organized labor is a very important partner, because also part of it is that they have interest, because they've also been losing members. I mean, the sluggish economy, or really the stagflation that we've been experiencing in the economy, affects organized labor, because it means that they have more members who are actually either getting retrenched or leaving the labor market. For them, they have an embedded interest. So they need to reposition themselves as thinking partner beyond advocacy and lobbying. And I think organized labor has also been struggling to repositioning and looking at the power dynamics between employers, government, and themselves, but also how do they use the political convening power that they enjoy, which comes with the strength of having members, but also influencing public policy on where it is. I mean, by design, most of them, it's not like they have funds, but interestingly, in South Africa, several organized labor have actually opened investment companies, which at the heart of it was about sustainability. So they actually need to go into the boardroom and really rethink about how do they deploy some of those funds actually in a way that not only assist their members to actually secure income, but also at the same time contribute in ensuring that we build a vibrant economy.
Sure.
Because
so, Phelisa,
the signals are very strong that this economy, at the heart of it, will rely on small, medium enterprises being actually supported with a very deliberate policy intervention, not haphazard. And the signs are there. The fact that you have big informal economy, but informal economy contributes to the GDP, but it's not getting.
All right. So can employment policies emerging from this dialogue, can they claim democratic legitimacy when major opposition parties and legacy foundations have boycotted? I mean, how does this affect implementation credibility with business and international investors?
No, I mean, the reality is that if South Africans, ordinary citizens, actually supports the outcome of the dialogue, I mean, I don't think that those who have decided to stay away would actually have a leg to stand on. They can raise their own issues. But I think at the heart of what South Africans are looking for, they're not looking for conversations. They're looking for practical execution of the commitment. That's it. People who want to know that we've come out of a national dialogue, what's going to happen on Monday? Where we're going to see the change, right? But I also think that my understanding is that of this dialogue is that it was intended to start a conversation, but with a lined up of different conversations that are going to take place at a provincial level, at a sectoral level. So this is going to be, it's an ongoing citizens conversation. And I think for me, part of why other people are feeling a lot more despondent about is that it's not going to be raising things that I knew, by the way. A lot of people have been. I made the point in one of the other interviews that when we actually abandoned the concept of imbizos, which was introduced some time ago by the former president Thabo Mbeki, which allowed a number of things. Firstly, context-specific issues that could be resolved by public sector, but also two, you build state capacity through those context-specific issues. Three, there is no broken telephone between citizens and government, and that government understands the pulse of the citizens as often as possible. But also at the same time, that citizens can directly influence the policy of a government. But also fundamentally is that government is able to understand the social evolution of society. South Africa has really evolved, and I think sometimes when you talk with people who are entrusted with leadership, they treat South Africa as still a 1994 country. I mean, you look at, for instance, the fact that 61% of people now have moved to urban areas looking for opportunities. They've left their their rural homes. So the economic migration, in fact, it's a second or third wave of economic migration, particularly by Black people, because communities where they are located in, there are actually no opportunities.
All
so
right.
in essence,
let me just jump in
it
there.
allows us.
Let me just jump in there, Phelisa. I think this conversation needs 2 hours. But before we let you go, 5 years from now, how will we know whether this national dialogue succeeded or failed? I mean, what single metric would definitely prove its impact on South African employment?
Two things. Firstly is economic growth. Secondly is South Africans talking to each other, but also valuing the principles of human rights that is enshrined in the Constitution.
All right. Phelisa, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
That was development economist and Oxfam South Africa board chair, Phelisa Nkomo.